Okay, welcome to another episode of Energetic Consulting's Sustainable Stories. We have our fantastic guest today, Kane Thornton, Chief Executive of the Clean Energy Council. Kane is a well-known face around the industry and a great advocate for our industry for many years now. The Clean Energy Council, as we know, is the peak energy body for the renewable energy and storage industry in Australia. And Kane has quite a detailed background. He's got more than a decade's experience in energy policy and leadership, and the development of the renewable energy industry in Australia. Kane has advocated and helped design policies that have been critical to our industry's growth, and he's a political advocate to this day and a media spokesperson. His previous roles include senior manager and an advisor for Hydro Tasmania, and Executive Officer of Renewable Energy Generators Australia. Kane, I think I could go on for another 10 minutes. You've done so much, but I think that's a little bit of a taste. For viewers, welcome.
Hi, Russell, and thanks for having me. No need to bore anyone with too much of my background, but it's great to be here, and thanks for the initiative for this. I think it's a great series.
Yeah, thanks, Kane. I mean, look, what we're aiming to do is just give back to businesses now and employees, staff, management, whoever they may be, to get some insights into the leaders of our industry and how the leaders cope with overwhelm, strain, how the leaders have developed their own coping mechanisms, maintain their own mental health, and maybe we can all learn something along the way during these really challenging times. Before we started recording, I know you've got a real passion for mental health and well-being, and I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, I kind of like to just go straight into it and ask the burning question that I have, which is, where did that passion develop from, and what does that mean for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I must say it's great to be sort of having a more personal conversation. I spent a lot of time talking about renewable energy and politics and coronavirus more recently, but I think this is a great way to remind ourselves and everyone that at the end of the day we're all human, and I guess we've all got our own passions, and we've all got our own sort of mental constitution, I guess, that plays, I think, a much bigger role in our lives, be that our professional lives or our personal lives. And so I guess my interest and passion on this topic really came from, I guess, both my own experiences over the years. I've had a very successful career and a happy life, and a lot of fun and adventure on the way through. But also at times, sometimes quite mysteriously, have kind of faced some real personal challenges and wondered why, and had to sort of come to terms, I guess, with my own mental health and really start to develop a better appreciation and understanding of who I am and how I'm configured, and how to actually manage my own well-being and mental health. And I think at the same time had, like many people, I think, had sort of friends and family around me, and watch people also suffer through their own mental health challenges. And I think all of that together sort of over the years has meant I've been, it's a topic that I find quite mysterious on one level. I think as a young person, I was brought up in, regional Australia. And so as a young person, as a male, probably in particular, you're not necessarily sort of educated, or you don't have a lot of role models to help you understand your own mental health, your own emotional well-being. And so I think it's something you sort of fumble along through a little bit, and at particular times sort of realize that was creating some challenges, and therefore have spent a lot of time reflecting and trying to understand. And I'm still on a journey as far as that goes.
Yeah, the journey never ends. And what fascinates me is the older that we get, it's that old adage that the more we learn, the less we realize we know. And it's a lifelong journey, there's no doubt. And for you, I mean, what did that look like? Was it reading books? Was it watching videos, doing courses, or sitting in meditation? What was that like for you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say growing up, in my early years, there really wasn't, I didn't have a lot of sort of a lot of tuition or guidance or anything of that form. I was really just living life as quickly and fast and as fun as I could. And so it probably wasn't until my sort of late 20s, early 30s where sort of circumstances sort of changed around me. And I guess combination of things. I found myself sort of drawn to and surrounding myself with people who I guess you'd probably describe as people with quite high emotional intelligence. I think my wife is an example of that. I was drawn to her because she had something, and I wasn't quite sure what it was at the time, but she had something that I thought was intriguing and was incredibly powerful. And I think only later did I realize that was an emotional intelligence and understanding that that I could only have dreamt of when I first met her. I guess then over the years, I mean, a lot of reading. I've got piles of books on my bedside table that you could kind of probably describe as some version of self-help books that I plow into from time to time and pick up and put down and everything else. So I've done a lot of reading over the years, and all sorts of various sort of courses and programs when I'm in different stages of life. And I practice. I'm a pretty energetic person, so I practice a lot of yoga. I do a lot of exercise. I guess it's something that I think maybe it's a particularly male thing, but if we're struggling with our physical health, we don't hesitate to do some stretches, go and get professional help, whatever it might be. Talk to our friends and family about my knee or my hip or my whatever. But our mental health, it's sort of, I think it's a bit sad that on one level we often have to go through that journey a bit more alone and find our own way. And that was certainly the case for me earlier in my life. And I guess now I feel sort of blessed to have a lot more support and friends and people who are sort of on probably a similar journey that we can feed off and learn from and share our mistakes and challenges with.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. I think, you hit the nail on the head for men that often, men feel like they don't perhaps have the skills and the coping mechanisms. Often, women seem to have higher levels of emotional intelligence to begin with, and men's emotional intelligence comes later in life, often is the case. We're cocky and, have a lot of bravado, and then life humbles us, and then we think, actually, we don't know as much as we thought we did. And then you go on a whole other journey of self-discovery. But during these times, I know I've certainly gone through, ups and downs on the solar coaster in our industry. And when I've been in those down moments, I've really had to reach out for help. And a lot of men, I think, struggle with that, reaching out and saying, actually, I'm not okay. And of course, there's the Are You Okay movement. And once a year, we all get behind that. But really, it's a 365-day-a-year journey that we should feel more comfortable to reach out and seek support if we need it, especially during hard times like Corona.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think it's quite a sad situation, the level of stigma that still exists around mental health. And I think particularly for men, as you said, I think women are probably on one level better equipped, but also I guess socially it's something that I don't think has the same stigma.
Yeah.
And so I think it's something that I've seen really serve particularly men quite badly. I think particularly probably in rural Australia, I think even more so. There's a real stigma still around mental health, and I feel like we're making progress. And things like Are You Okay Day, I think helps. I think even just this week we saw Malcolm Turnbull release his biography and autobiography and talk about his own mental health challenges. And I think the more of that occurs, the more we start to normalize mental health, and we start to take some of the stigma away. And hopefully with that comes people's sort of openness and willingness to reach out, to talk to each other, to share their experiences. And I guess as if you like a leader in the industry, certainly a leader in our organization, I feel like we've got a bit of a responsibility to do that and try and chip away and normalize and help other people, I guess, be more comfortable with it. Again, congratulations. And I think, things like this, I think, help and play a role as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kane. for me, what motivates me is actually to, having gone through so much challenge and struggle, is how can we compress years of knowledge and learning into a short amount of time and share that so others don't have to go through that same level of pain and strain along the way. And what fascinates me, because, in more recent times, I'm getting to know more about you, is that you're an extremely well-rounded character, which is often the sign of a leader. I mean, a leader, yes, can make decisions when needed, has intelligence and skill, but also a great leader actually has emotional intelligence, and has the ability to bring out the best in others. But that's typically because we do it with ourselves first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm sure we've all worked with what you might describe as sort of old school traditional managers and leaders, and I think emotional intelligence wasn't something that was is the first term that comes to mind, wasn't something that was valued, and often they didn't have a lot of that. And I know certainly in the Clean Energy Council, the culture and the values of the organisation is one where we care for each other and we're respectful of each other, and I think with that comes if you like, a culture of sort of acceptance and self-awareness and if you like, emotional intelligence. And I think that's really important. As you say, it's hard to it's hard to help or force that upon others if you haven't been on some of that journey yourself. And I've still got a long way to go. I'm but a student. But yeah, it's something that I think is really, really important, and I've seen the benefits of that both in my own life and people around me, and if I can share a bit of that and help others on that journey, then all the better.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know in my life I've had a lot of mentors. I'm a big fan of mentorship, because I think it's a lost part of our culture. Often we live in a nuclear dynamic of isolation, which wasn't the case in years gone by as much. Do you have any particular role models that you've grown up with, or in current times, do you have mentors, role models in your life now?
Yeah, lots of them actually. I mean, I sort of try and, I guess if you like, try and surround myself with people who I admire, I respect, and if you like, I can, sounds a bit mercenary, doesn't it? But I can absorb some of the sort of gold and lessons in their life. I mentioned my wife already. Some of my closest friends are people that I've got incredible respect for the experiences that they've had in their lives and the way that they've come through it, and the way in which and the amount of time they spend in understanding themselves and trying to develop their own emotional intelligence and resilience and the like. So I think that there's a long list of people. Some of them don't even know who I am. I read their books and immerse myself in their podcasts and books and things like that through to my closest friends and family, and even my children. I've got an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old daughter, and I feel like I can learn a lot and still do. They sometimes challenge me, but in other ways, I'm in awe of who they are and how they hold themselves. So I guess it might sound a bit twee, but I think there's so much you can learn from everyone around you, whether they're older, younger, your neighbour, whether they realise that they're a well-rounded human being, or they're just struggling through life. I think it's often those sort of simple lessons, and every little interaction you can take something from it in terms of both a lesson from the other person, but also how you react to it. I think is often where the real learning and gold is, and you don't need to be in a cave on a mountain in Tibet to necessarily to get that.
Well, what I'm hearing behind all that is humility, I think. There is a certain humbleness in the approach. And I think when we do stay humble, we open ourselves up to learning and growing. When we think we know it all and we have all the answers, then we shut down. And the role models that I enjoy the most are often so humble, in the sense that they could easily be the smartest person in the room, but they walk in as if they know nothing. And they just explain it to me in layman's terms. I'm just very simple. Just explain it to me simply. I mean, let's face it, they get it, but really when you help elevate others and you come from that place of humility, then you're going to grow, you're going to learn, you're going to absorb information.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, and that was probably one of my big life lessons, and probably one of my big challenges. I had a pretty successful kind of life and career through my 20s, and traveled the world and did different things, and then probably sort of in my early 30s, I guess, got to this point of sort of running very fast and hard, and then sort of thinking, well, this doesn't quite, I'm sure I thought I was the smartest person in the room and I knew everything, but then actually some things happened that kind of meant, actually, I'm not sure I am, and I'm not sure I do. And I think that was some moments that caused me both, I think, a lot of internal kind of angst, and kind of really unsettled me. I became quite unsettled for a while. And then I think out of that realized, actually, I know very little. I might know a lot about a few different things and have some certain skills that are pretty valuable in some areas, but actually in the bigger life story, I felt like I kind of ignored kind of my own humanity for those first 2 or 3 decades. And I kind of, probably at the age of about 35, felt like I was a student again.
Yep.
And that actually I'd almost wasted the first 30 odd years of my life, and actually only then started to realize, actually, there's a whole other dimension of who I am and how I'm programmed and motivated and how I behave that I really had no idea about and had no insight. And I guess that's the journey I'm on, and that's, I guess, what I feel like I've now got some knowledge of, and I guess that's another chapter in my development that I'm now in.
And what did that look like? I mean, 35 actually for a lot of people is a key year. I mean, it certainly was in my life. Did you have any particular failures that you went through? I mean, tell me about some of the low moments that you had to go through, and how you navigated those pathways to build yourself up again.
Yeah. Look. I mean, I wouldn't sort of go as far as say I was, that I was suffering sort of clinical depression or anything like that. But I think I got to this point where I felt like I was running really hard. Both sort of personally and professionally. I was doing lots of stuff, and I was trying to achieve all this stuff, and I just got to this point where it's like I felt like I was sort of spinning my wheels, and I felt like I was stuck. Probably more at a personal level, I was stuck, and professionally, I was like, I keep trying to do this stuff, harder and better and faster, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And I guess I kind of then, it's probably sort of an existential crisis. My turning 40 was a really tough period, and I think it was a bit of this, well, I've got to this point, and I'm a CEO, and I've done this and I've done that, and what that all feels a bit kind of meaningless all of a sudden. And so, I mean, I certainly had periods of what felt like depression, and I didn't want to get out of bed, and I couldn't figure out what my sort of life purpose was, and everything was a bit of what's the point, and everything sort of felt really dark and heavy for me. And I guess that was probably the sort of trigger. I guess they say often that you need to sort of have it's a bit sad, isn't it, really, on one level, but you have to have a sort of moment of crisis, if you like, to allow for that sort of transformation, to let something go. And I think that was probably the period where I had to sort of shift the way I kind of thought about myself, and some of my mindset about just trying to achieve stuff for the sake of it.
Yep.
To try and impress other people. What's the point of that? It sort of, on one level it was successful, but another level it sort of all became a bit meaningless. And so that was probably the period and the catalyst to go, there's something more to the world. And that's when I was much more drawn to, again, I mentioned my wife a few times, but she was sort of sitting there with already, I think, a level of wisdom and intelligence that I probably hadn't ever grasped, and went, hang on a second, what's that all about? And away I went from there in a bit of a different personal journey.
Yeah, that existential crisis is, I mean, I actually think it's critical. I mean, there are certain individuals that have never hit low points, and I'm sure they will come. I mean, not that I wish that on anyone, but we have to expect that at some point in our life, everything is not going to go swimmingly. We're going to have crisis. And right now we are in a crisis, right around the world. I mean, it is a crisis. but it's also an opportunity. And I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that, of turning crisis into opportunity, perhaps reevaluating how we do things, how we are in the world, and what's important to us. Like what do we actually, who do we want to be, and what do we want to achieve during these times?
Yeah, I think that's right. That's certainly been my experience. You sort of need to have something of a crisis to, I think, to both let go and then to allow yourself to evolve. I just did a really fascinating workshop a month or so ago on rituals. Something that I think have slowly disappeared from our lives. And interestingly, as I think religions actually have a lot of ritual, and those of us who aren't particularly religious, I think we've lost some of that part of our lives. But one of the essence of ritual is to sort of acknowledge and allow yourself to let go of something, to be able to create the space to move somewhere else. And for some of us, that crisis comes in whatever form, whatever, you might lose a job or a relationship breakdown. But I think you're right, the current situation, the coronavirus that's sort of been forced on us, I think, and I sort of quietly hope, one of the upsides of that will be that for many of us, we've been forced to isolate. And actually sometimes isolation, I think, is really important, to allow yourself to turn inwards and remove some of the disruptions. I think it's very easy in the world to just fill your life with sort of disruption and noise and doing stuff. And I think the virus, and particularly the self-isolation piece, I know it's been very difficult and challenging for people, but I hope on the other side, it's actually created a moment for people to have a bit more introspection and a bit more reflection. And for some people, I know I've had this experience, actually, it's reminded me that I love spending time with my family and with my daughters, and I've been able to, been forced to, in some cases, spend a lot more time with them through this period, and it's great. And when the social distancing and regulations are relaxed, that's something that I really want to hold on to, and I hope that for many people it's been a moment of some transformation. Some of it might be small, but others are more significant.
And that reevaluation, I mean, I certainly know a lot of people that every 6 months will just stop, reevaluate every 3 months or 12 months, whatever it might be. But just look at, right, am I on track? Where am I heading? What's true north? And what I've found fascinating throughout my career is that so many individuals, but businesses, also don't know what true north is. Like, what's the end game and the outcome that we really want?
I'm a really strong believer in the sort of power of purpose, and I know that probably sounds a bit cliche, doesn't it? But what I guess through my own career and sort of life journey, I've felt like when I'm clear on my purpose, then that gives me a lot of strength and resilience and clarity, and everything flows with that. And when I reflect on the periods that I've really struggled, I think it's because my purpose hasn't been clear. It's become a bit messy, and I think that's pretty natural. As we go through life, sure, my purpose and focus today is very different to what it was when I was 20. But I go out of my way now, at least twice a year, sometimes more often, to just check in on my own purpose. And that's not a sort of PowerPoint slide corporate thing, but it's just spending time sort of in my own space and just checking in on it. Is that still my purpose in this world? And therefore, am I spending my time? Am I thinking about, am I behaving in a way that lines up with that? And I find that actually a really healthy and powerful exercise.
And what, if I can ask, what is your purpose? Do you have a clear sense of that today?
Yeah. It's at multiple levels, but I guess at the highest level, it's I'm strongly motivated to make the world a better place. It's something that I think sit deep in my values from when I was a small child, and the way that I then think about that at the next level is climate change is, I think, the single biggest threat to the future of our planet and the people that live on it. And I've sort of dedicated the last probably 15 to 20 years of my life to that issue. And so my life purpose really aligns with trying to make the world a better place, which cascades down to doing something about climate change. If you look at Australia, Obviously, energy is where it's at as far as the major contributor to climate change, and therefore driving renewable energy into the country is my way of making a contribution to that. And I feel like I've got some skills and experience that kind of come to bear in all that. So a lot of my my energy and sort of passion all comes, I guess, from deep within, of feeling like I can make a difference to that, and living my life to that life purpose.
And what would you say? I mean, I think a lot of the time when people become disempowered and overwhelmed, we're actually falling into fear. So right now, there's a lot of fear getting bandied around, and a lot of people are impacted. Like there is no doubt, and that is tragic for a lot of people that have been. And I would certainly throw myself in that camp. I mean, and you would be in the camp as well. But I mean, I've certainly been heavily impacted by what's happening at the moment. But what about this fear aspect? What do you do in your life to combat the fear? When it rises up as that sort of demon, comes up, and it can easily cripple us. We can easily get to a point where we're just inactive and we become overwhelmed and therefore don't take any action. What do you do in your life to confront that?
Yeah, I think fear can be both a great motivator, but also, as you say, it can really destroy people's lives as well. Yeah, look, I'm fundamentally quite an optimistic person, so I'm biased towards being optimistic and positive, and I think that probably comes from my again, back to my childhood and the sort of role models that my parents were, and how they live their lives, and that obviously rubbed off on me. I guess, but I still have my moments. I tend to avoid, and it's at risk of being a bit delusional. Things like climate science, for example. I used to study a lot of climate science and absorb it. Actually, now I find it quite disturbing and depressing. And I think. And I find if I absorb too much of it, I become quite demotivated, because it's a disturbing future that's painted by climate science, for example. So one way I manage that is actually I don't pay much attention to it. I know it's there, but I don't spend a lot of time delving in it. I try and avoid spending time and listening to the views of people who are deeply negative and kind of have a lot of destructive energy, if you like. That's not to say I'm not sympathetic to and like to try and help and care for people who are having a tough time, but true negativity and darkness I'll try and avoid, and then I try and surround myself by nice things. I spend a fair bit of time outdoors. I like to take my dog for a walk to the park at the end of the street. I like to do exercise. I like to read. I love to garden. All of these sort of simple things that bring me pleasure and joy, and remind me that that life can be pretty good, and there's a lot to be thankful. There's a lot to be thankful about, and there's lots of reasons to take optimism. One of the reasons I love working in renewable energy is because it's an industry and a cause with incredible optimism. The successes that the industry has had are incredibly inspiring and give me a sense of hope that actually on the climate change thing, we've got the solutions and technologies, and we can make progress, and we can get there. So that's a long answer, but they're kind of some of the things that I do to try and avoid fear and drag myself out of those moments of negativity and remain positive and optimistic and motivated.
Yeah, and I mean, you certainly are. I mean, you're an extremely driven individual. Do you have any particular, I mean, if we get a little bit tactical, do you have anything particular in the morning that you do to get yourself going? I mean, a lot of people, especially in these times right now, are overwhelmed. The alarm goes off, and then what happens for you?
Yeah, I have a ruthless regime and program. Certainly in the morning, it actually drives my family a bit crazy, I think. But when I get up, I do yoga every morning. So the first thing I do is come in and spend anywhere between sort of 5 minutes and an hour, depending on how I'm feeling and what's going on. But every morning I start with a yoga routine to really get me sort of, I guess, both well, awake, to get me moving and get the body sort of get the body moving and the blood flowing. You know, I think it's a moment of sort of peace and quiet, which is important. And I guess it's a form of meditation for me. And then look, depending on most days, I'm an enthusiastic bike rider. That's one of the things that I turned to through my midlife crisis. I became a middle-aged male in Lycra, a mammal, and both the exercise part, but also the community part of it was really powerful. I've got a great group of guys that I ride with. I was going to say most Saturday mornings, pretty well every Saturday morning. In fact, even during the current crisis period where we ride, albeit in the comforts of our lounge room, connected up via Zoom on our trainers. So,
fantastic. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess there's some of the things that I sort of do every morning just to really get me awake and focus up. You know, exercise is really important to me. You know, I really like that idea that, you know, we deal with stress by one of three ways. We breathe it out, and some of the meditations I do have a strong focus on breathing. We sweat it out, and that's about exercise, which I do quite a bit of each day. And then we talk it out, and I guess finding the time to talk to you know, my family, friends, colleagues, whatever it might be, I think are all ways that I use to help manage myself.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, some of these things seem simplistic, but they're so crucial. And I mean, I have a voracious appetite for reading and podcasts, and some of the people that I love learning about. I mean, when I learned about Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, and one of the three things that he finds most important in his life is the breath. I mean, and he attributes his success to the breath, on, you know, amongst many other things. So coming back to those simple things throughout the day, I mean, I personally get over revved. Like my nickname's Tank, right? So 12 hours, I can work like 16-hour days, and it's ridiculous, right? And I burn myself out. I can do it for about 3 months, then I burn out. I mean, I used to be able to do it for like 3 years. These days I could do it for like 3 days and then I burn out. But then coming back to these little breaks throughout the day of like breath or stopping or just taking moments to balance ourselves and keep that sort of harmony within ourselves, I think is crucial.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I'm probably a bit similar. I think I operate at a fairly high frequency, and therefore I've got high energy levels. But I think having those periods just to pause and stop, I think are really important and powerful. And I said I'm an enthusiastic gardener, so I try, and one of the beauties of working from home during this period is I get to spend a lot more time in my garden. And so, you know, as soon as I get off from this, I'll be out sitting in the garden, either in the backyard, watching the cabbage moths lay their eggs on my broccoli. Trying to be compassionate towards the cabbage moths is very difficult. Or out in my front garden, which is a native garden, and actually quite a beautiful. We've had a really beautiful visitor in my front garden about a month ago when the crisis first broke. An owl arrived in a eucalypt tree out in the front yard, and it's been there pretty well ever since. So that's it's lovely to have a creature like that that's so sort of such wisdom and mystique sort of sitting up there looking down on me at this period of time. It's quite beautiful. So I'll go out and check up on that regularly throughout the course of the day as well.
Fantastic. And Kane, I mean, you come across as an A-type, so you're an A-type personality. I mean, you don't get to be a chief executive unless you are. So you're incredibly driven, but yet there is this other side to you of balance and harmony, which again often comes from that existential crisis of having to move through that to actually there is something more to life, and something more important than just work. So what would you say to people at the moment who are A-type driven, wanting to double down on their efforts so they can, you know, stay in business, or having to double down on their efforts, but then getting to this point of like revving so hard they're about to break? You know, what could you speak to about balance? And because it's hard, like businesses are suffering right now and there's no easy answer.
Yeah, look, there isn't any easy answer, and I'm always really nervous to sort of offer up free sort of personal advice to people. I mean, again, we've all been on our journeys, and people often have to sort of learn them and be ready to change and evolve depending on where they're up to. I mean, I think to your earlier point about energy and spinning hard, I mean, it does feel like a period for many people that sometimes you just need to put your head down and just go for it and put in long hours and days and kind of muscle through. And I think we all go through periods of that. And I'm sure for some people this is a period. Like, don't let's not pretend for them now's the time to go and start listening to podcasts on mindfulness or take a sabbatical or whatever it is. So I think being respectful of that, I think is important. I mean, I think one of the terms, against a bit of a commonly used phrase, but sort of working smarter, not harder. I know I got into patterns of just thinking that I just need to work harder and do longer days and just push harder and everything else. And there comes a point in time where I realized actually that's actually, not only is it not helpful, it's actually quite unhelpful. And therefore stopping and making sure I take time out and recharge and, take up my role with a bit more openness and calmness actually is much more important. And actually people around me were looking for me, not just to keep pushing them, but actually they're looking for me to give them a license to just pause and ease off. And that obviously meant I had to demonstrate some of that behavior as well.
Well, and what about creativity? Because, I mean, typically when we push harder, in my experience anyway, the creativity goes out the window. What I've found is if I can create pockets of time for creative thinking, it's not a matter of just working harder. Let's think outside the box and innovate. What does innovation and creativity look like for you, and how do you nurture that?
Yeah, it's a really good one. It's an area that I still struggle with a little bit. I'm not naturally a very creative person. I've sort of dabbled in various things over the years. It's actually something I'm learning from, particularly my 13-year-old daughter. She's very, very creative, and I'm in awe of her imagination and creativity. And I think creating more space for that is obviously important. And I'm probably just at the start of that journey in trying to create a bit more space for that. I think, over the years I've dabbled in, various creative pursuits, and I've always been really critical of myself. Oh God, that's an appalling drawing or etching. Don't ever do that again. And so I'm probably saying to be a bit more less critical of myself in that space. I said gardening is probably one of the areas that I find some creativity in a sort of unusual way. So I think it is important. It's something, I feel like I'm still on a bit of a journey as far as that.
Well,
Some of the books beside my bed are on that topic, and I haven't yet got very far into them.
But I would hazard a guess to say that, because business can be pure creativity and play as well. And I would imagine that you probably have been fairly creative within the Clean Energy Council of creating new strategies, new directions, nurturing the culture. I mean, that does take creative thinking and strategic thinking. Business often is like a pure metaphor for like life, because it challenges us in all these different directions. So have you seen it come out in your professional life in that way?
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think one of the areas that that I feel like I've evolved on over the years is the willingness and openness to failure. Again, I think that was part of my sort of midlife crisis and transformation, that I was so determined to always be right and never to fail, and I take failure quite badly. And I think and hope now that I'm part of my sort of realization and transformation was that actually, to be honest, we're all human beings and we're all fundamentally flawed one way or another. And I now sort of try and celebrate my failures and really take them as learning opportunities. Again, I know it's another cliche, but particularly through this period, I hope it's been really challenging, I think, for everyone. And I'm really extraordinarily proud of the job that the Clean Energy Council team have been doing through this period in particular. But I think accepting that none of us are working at our best, and despite that, we're still achieving a lot and doing some really incredible work. And I think being kind to ourselves, recognizing that it's okay to do some stuff and get it wrong, particularly in this environment, and we'll learn from it and push on. So hopefully, I feel like being okay and comfortable with failure and creating a culture where that's accepted and not punished, I think is probably one of the really important foundations for more creativity.
Yeah, and sometimes, there's this concept of do we need to create a masterpiece, or do we need to just get some bloody oil on the canvas? It doesn't have to be perfect, and let's just try and pivot. If something doesn't work, it's fine, just pivot. It's okay. Just keep pivoting until you find what does work. And failure, God, it takes so many of us countless years to learn that it's okay to fail. It's only a failure if you keep making the same mistake over and over again. Otherwise, it's just normal.
Yeah, one of my real mentors said to me quite a number of years ago in a professional environment that CEOs and leaders need to be biased towards action, and they need to be biased towards positivity. And I think they're two things that I feel like I'm naturally my natural biases, but I sort of try to foster, and I guess with that positivity comes I think a bigger appreciation now and an acceptance that there'll be failures and mistakes, and that's okay. None of us are perfect, and we shouldn't delude ourselves ever into thinking that we will be perfect and that we won't make mistakes.
And what about, you just mentioned, CEOs of that were role models in your life. You've come across or been in contact with and dealt with hundreds or thousands of businesses and their leadership. And no doubt you would have seen some things in common. Do you have like 2 or 3 things that you found in common in great leaders of organizations, of all the businesses that you've come in contact with? Is there anything in particular that stands out, a commonality?
Yeah. Look, we were talking earlier about the sort of, the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership. And I must say that's certainly something I don't think I appreciated and respected that early on in my career. But certainly that's the trait that I'm most drawn to. And when I think of the people who inspire me, then I think that's absolutely right at the top. And I hope that certainly in the medium and long term that leaders with those traits win out over those who don't. That's my theory. I think there's plenty of evidence that is suggesting that. So I think that's there. I'm also, I think people having the courage to make decisions. I think that's something that, again, I've wrestled with at different points in time. You've got to make big decisions. It can be tough. It's sometimes people's livelihoods or, some pretty big consequences of decisions. And so I'm in awe of people who can particularly sort of more instinctively make big decisions and do it swiftly and quickly and move on, because that's something I don't do. I need to take my time for those big decisions. So they're probably a couple of traits. One of the beauties and the real pleasures of my role is that I get to spend a lot of time with a lot of different CEOs and companies, and indeed, right through to politicians and community leaders and media personalities and the like. And I'm always sort of a student of observing people and trying to figure out what the bits are that the gems in there that I can learn from or reflect on or take away with me. So there's probably a book in all of that. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's been written already many times over. But there's a whole collection of traits that that I'm constantly looking out for and reflecting on.
Yeah, and you mentioned decision making, and one of the tools that I've come across is the head, heart, gut check-in. So Chad Meng Tang from Google, who later, I think he got some award from Obama, Barack Obama, former president of the US. But basically he developed the concept of the 3 brains in the body. So we have, our brain in our head, and I can't remember the figures. I'll probably get this wildly wrong, but it's something like this 100 million neurons of activity in that brain. And then we have our heart brain, and there's something like, 30 million neurons in that brain. And then we have our gut brain and something like 40 million neurons in that brain. And often we think we just have one brain to work with, but actually instinct and that intelligence is aligning the three different brains, so then you can act decisively and instinctively because you're in alignment. And it's a really cool little exercise that Google developed to get in alignment with that. It takes 2 to 5 minutes.
Interesting. I might have to look that up, because I mean, certainly when I was sort of brought up in regional Victoria, where I think people are they're very grounded. And I think living in particularly regional areas, I think you need to be very grounded, because that's you spend a lot of time working in the environment and working on the land and everything else. And so I think that sensory experience is critically important. But it has been a bit of a journey for me to sort of have that realization that there's other dynamics to us. And I think it's still something, particularly the gut. I feel like I'm better at tapping into the heart and recognizing the importance of the heart. I think the gut's still something that I don't quite have the confidence and the practice to tap quickly into that, to say what's it saying, and what do I do with that, and how do I balance that with my natural my natural sort of power of my intellect in trying to dictate everything that I do and decisions I make.
Well, perhaps that's something I can share at a later stage. I'll put it up on social media and head, heart, gut check-in.
Yes, sounds good.
Kane, I'm going to ask one last question, because I know you're extremely busy. You've got a big day ahead of you. You're running a webinar straight after this, and you are a chief executive after all. So the last question would be, it's the end of your life. Let's pretend it's the end of your life. It's the last day on planet Earth for you, and you have the opportunity to share 3 pearls of wisdom with your grandchildren, if you had them. And basically, it could be 3 words or 3, phrases of something that resonates, to just pass on some wisdom succinctly to the grandchildren. Do you have any sense of what you would pass on for their journey ahead of them?
Yes, I do. And my daughters would probably tell you that I'd need a lot more than 3, and that I'm not waiting until that moment to pass them on. So look, there's a whole bunch, but a few of the ideas that certainly have been very significant for me, and I sort of try to share with people around me. I guess one is that the world is ran by those who turn up. Another way to put that is, you'll miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, etc. It's all the same theory. I guess it comes from, a view that turning up and having a crack is critically important. And, none of us are born geniuses, but having a go, working hard, etc., will is really important. It'll actually bring you a lot of fulfillment and help to leave the world a better place. The other one I think is around kindness, and in particular, I think being kind to yourself. I know I've spent parts of my life not being very kind to myself, and I think when I'm in that space, naturally enough, I'm not very kind to others around me. And so, I think, to put that differently, it's about compassion. And I think that has to start with yourself first, to, cut yourself some slack. I think for the mistakes you made, I think one of my greatest, realizations in life was that I'm imperfect, and that's entirely okay. And actually, you're sort of deluding yourself if you think otherwise. And indeed, a lot of anger and negativity can come with that sort of a mindset. And so it is, I think, to be compassionate to yourself. And from that, I guess, probably both of those, is probably the third one, about generosity and care for others. That, I think the reality is that all of us, to be honest, all of us, many of us living in Australia, all of us who've got a job and a home, instantly means that we're so much more blessed than so many other people around the world. And I kind of think that gives us, if you like, a responsibility to try and leave the world a better place and help people who are less fortunate than ourselves. And I think drawing on the other two, if we can generally only do that if we're if we're turning up and having a crack, and also if we're compassionate to ourselves and those around us, then I think that puts us in a good place to be able to help and be compassionate towards others and help others who no doubt are often facing bigger challenges than ourselves.
Well said, and great messages for us all to learn from. And Kane, I thank you for turning up and having a crack today on Sustainable Stories and sharing some of your wisdom of your years of experience, and just being so open and generous with your time and your journey and your personal life. Many people will never have had that level of insight into you and what you're about, and I think we're all the better for it.
Great, thanks, Russell. Really appreciated the opportunity, and I was, as a student of life, I'm intrigued by some of the snippets that you've been sharing, and look forward to learning a bit more about some of the gems and pieces of gold and some of your life story. So maybe one of these days we can turn the tables and hear a bit more from you.
More than happy to have the tables turned, and you can be my interviewer. I'm happy to be the interviewee, and we'll flip it on its head, and in the coming weeks.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Russell.
Thanks, Kane. Cheers.